On a Friday night in September 1971, at exactly 11:51 p.m., a security guard named Phil Dominguez was making his usual rounds through NBC's Burbank studio. He checked the doors, he checked the lights, and when he reached the third-floor corridor, the one connecting the Tonight Show set to the back offices, he stopped. Two voices. Low. One calm and measured, the other occasionally breaking into something that sounded almost like laughter, but not quite. He turned the corner and saw them. Johnny Carson, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his jacket folded beside him. Across from him, cross-legged, Bruce Lee, the martial artist who had been on the show earlier that evening, the one who had made Carson flinch with a punch that stopped 1 inch from his nose. Dominguez would tell the story years later. He almost told them the building was closing. But something about the way they were sitting, not facing the same direction, not making eye contact, just two men talking to the floor between them, made him turn around and walk the other way. He didn't know it then. Nobody did. But what was happening in that corridor was the most important conversation either man would ever have, and one of them had less than 2 years left to live. I often see comments from people who didn't realize they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is free and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. To understand this night, we need to go back a few months, to the beginning of the summer of 1971. Bruce Lee was 30 years old that summer, and had spent a full decade in America. 10 years. And in those 10 years, America had taught him exactly this. No matter how fast you are, no matter how good you are, if your face doesn't look like this face, the lead role isn't yours. He had played Kato in the Green Hornet series, a masked, quiet character who stayed in the background. When the show ended, Bruce knocked on every producer's door in town. He got the same answer from all of them. You're amazing, but the American audience isn't ready. His wife Linda once recounted what he told her. They say they're not ready. I've been here 10 years. When will they be ready? When I'm dead. Johnny Carson's world, from the outside, looked perfect. The Tonight Show reached 15 million people every night. But in 1971, the face behind that face was cracking. His divorce from his second wife, Joanne Copeland, had begun. According to a producer who knew him during that period, Carson had started showing up to the studio a little earlier every night. Because the studio, at least, was full. There were people, sounds, lights. When he went home, every room in that big Bel Air house greeted him with a different shade of silence. What you are about to hear is drawn from the documented details of two real lives, their struggles, their known histories, their private silences, and imagines the conversation that the evidence of those lives always seemed to be pointing toward. The facts about Bruce Lee are real. The facts about Johnny Carson are real. The meeting between them, and what was said, lives in the space between what we know and what we can feel must have been true. On September 12, 1971, Bruce Lee appeared on The Tonight Show as a guest. The segment went well. He demonstrated a few techniques, threw a punch toward Carson, and stopped it right in front of his nose. The audience laughed and applauded. It was a 4.5-minute segment. Professional, entertaining, forgettable. Exactly what Hollywood expected from Bruce Lee. Come in, throw a few kicks, get a laugh, leave. But that night, Bruce Lee didn't leave. And this detail, the fact that Bruce didn't leave, would change everything within a few hours. The show was wrapping up at 11:20 p.m. Everyone was leaving. The audience, the orchestra, the makeup crew. The corridors filled with the sounds of rolling suitcases, closing doors, retreating footsteps. Bruce Lee put on his jacket in the green room, called Linda, said, "I'm on my way." He walked toward the parking lot. The September night in Burbank was cool. His car was waiting. He pulled out his keys. And he stopped. What happened in that moment? Nobody knows for certain. Linda Lee described it years later. Bruce told me he got into his car that night, but something pulled him back. He never fully explained what it was. He just said, "I needed to go back." Bruce put the keys back in his pocket and returned to the studio. At that point, everyone had left the building. Everyone except one person. The green room door was ajar. The only light came from the yellow bulbs above the makeup mirror. Half of them switched off. And in that half light, Johnny Carson was sitting. He was still in his stage clothes, but his tie was loosened, his collar open. He had wiped off his own makeup, roughly, with a towel. Streaks of foundation still lined his jaw. He was gripping the glass in his hand tightly, his knuckles white. "I thought you left," Carson said. without looking up. "So did I," Bruce said. Carson finally raised his head. That famous expression, the one that was always ready, always in control, was gone. In its place was exhaustion. Maybe something more. "Come in," he said. "If you're not in a rush." Bruce crossed the threshold and sat across from him. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The night sounds of the studio, the distant hum of an elevator, the hallway clock, the ventilation, filled the room. That silence was the first silence of the night. It wouldn't be the last. Bruce started talking. It was a good show. A standard end-of-night line. Carson smiled faintly, but behind the smile there was a weight. "They're all good shows," he said. "Every night a good show. 2,500 good shows in a row." There was no pride in the sentence, no complaint either. It sounded like a man counting down a prison sentence. Bruce noticed it but didn't push. Not yet. He stood up, looked at the photos on the wall. Shots of Carson with guests over the years. Sinatra, Dean Martin, Hope, in every one, the same smile, the same angle, the same professional warmth. "The man in these photos," Bruce said, pointing at one. "Who is he?" Carson paused. "What do you mean?" "There's a man standing with the same smile in every photo. Who is he?" Carson didn't answer. He set his glass on the table. The air in the green room shifted. "Good question," he said. There was no humor in his voice. "I wonder that myself sometimes." And with that sentence, the conversation began to slide from the surface downward, into darker waters. "You don't want to go home tonight," Bruce said. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. Carson studied him. He had spent 30 years learning how to read people, but he wasn't used to people reading him. "Home is a big word," he said, then stopped. "Without people in it, it's just an address." Bruce waited, said nothing. Carson walked to the window. Burbank's nightlights, the red and white streaks of the highway, a gas station sign, an ordinary night. "Joanne and I are done," he said. His back was still turned to Bruce. "Well, not done, in the process of being done. The lawyers are talking. I go home, she comes home, but we're never in the same room. Last week we ran into each other in the kitchen, our own kitchen, and neither of us knew what to say. Strangers in our own kitchen. You know what the worst part is," Carson said. "When I get home, I turn on the television. I watch my own show. And the man on screen is laughing, cracking jokes, holding everyone's attention. And I don't recognize him." Carson hadn't reached the deepest well yet. But Bruce Lee hadn't opened the lid on his own well either. "Come on," Carson said, with a sudden decision. "We'll drown in here. Let's walk." They left the green room. They walked side by side down the empty corridor. Carson's steps steady and familiar, Bruce's light and nearly silent. They reached the stairwell. The stairwell was cold, the midnight cold of concrete. One of the fluorescent lights was broken, flickering on and off. Carson sat on the third step, Bruce one step below, and Bruce pulled something from his pocket, a pack of Marlboros he had picked up from Dominguez's desk on the way in. "Unopened. Smoke?" Bruce said. "Quit 4 years ago. I never started." They looked at each other. Bruce tore the cellophane, pulled out a cigarette, and held it out to Carson. Carson took it. Bruce took one for himself. Carson produced a matchbook from his wallet, a promotional one with the NBC logo. The first wisps of smoke rose through the cold air of the stairwell. They both coughed, Bruce more so, and with that cough, the last official wall of the night came down. Neither of them knew that the Marlboro pack, that pack that belonged to neither of them, would become the silent witness of the night. And that years later, it would return in a very different place, carrying a very different meaning. They were sitting in the stairwell, cigarette smoke curling in the flickering light of the broken fluorescent. It was well past midnight. And Bruce Lee, maybe emboldened by the false comfort of the smoke, maybe because he simply couldn't hold it in any longer, began to talk. "Last month I went to an audition," he said. His voice was calm, but something was being crushed beneath it. "Warner Brothers, a kung fu series. A role that could have been written for me, a Chinese monk in America. I walked in, we talked for 2 hours. I explained the character, the philosophy, the choreography. On the way out, the director patted my shoulder. 'Bruce, you are this role.'" He paused, took a drag from the cigarette, coughed. 2 weeks later they called. They gave the role to David Carradine, a man who doesn't know martial arts, can't speak Chinese, isn't Asian. And you know what, Johnny? I wasn't even surprised. Carson was about to say something, but Bruce continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Once at a restaurant, Hollywood Boulevard, The waiter handed me a Chinese menu. I asked for English, he laughed. "This is easier for you, right?" he said. "I've been in this country for 10 years, my wife is American, my children were born here." But Bruce Lee hadn't touched the real wound yet, and when he did, everything in that stairwell would change. "You know what really hurts?" Bruce said, his eyes fixed on the concrete. "I can teach the fighting, I can teach the philosophy, but there's one thing I can't change, my face. These eyes, these cheekbones, I can't change them. And this country tells me every single day that the problem isn't my talent. The problem is my face." His hands, those lethally fast hands, were trembling. "My son Brandon is 4. One day he asked me, 'Dad, am I American or Chinese?' And I, a man who should never have to be afraid of anyone, froze in front of that question. I didn't know the right answer. I still don't." Silence in the stairwell, the buzz of the broken fluorescent, Carson's breathing. 14 seconds. 14 seconds, in a stairwell at midnight. On live television, 14 seconds is a disaster. The kind of gap that sends producers lunging for the commercial break button. But there was no camera here, just 2 men and concrete walls. Carson pressed his cigarette into the step and put it out. Then he brought his hands to his face, pressed his palms over his eyes. His shoulders began to tremble. Barely noticeable at first, then unmistakable. This was Johnny Carson, the man who hadn't lost control in 4,500 episodes. And now, in a stairwell with an audience of 1, he was shaking. Bruce didn't touch him, didn't stand up, he just stayed there, waiting. When Carson pulled his hands away, his eyes were red. His voice was different. The baritone was gone, thinner, more fragile. "Last winter," he said. "January. The house was empty. Joanne had left, taken half her things. I sat in the living room in the dark. The TV was on, my show was playing. On the screen I was laughing, telling jokes. And I was sitting there alone in the dark, watching that man." He took a breath. "I picked up the phone, called Joanne. I had nothing to say. I just wanted a voice. She didn't pick up. That night I understood something," Carson said. His voice was cracking. "Every night I talk to 10 million people. 10 million people listen to me, laugh with me. But when I get home I can't call a single person to say good night. 10 million people, and nobody." He turned and looked into Bruce's eyes, directly, without the mask. "You say you're invisible, you're right, but I'm invisible too. The difference is, your invisibility was chosen for you by others. Mine, I built it myself. For 30 years, smile by smile, I built a wall. And now I'm trapped behind it. And nobody knows there's someone behind the wall." Bruce slowly reached out his hand and placed it on Carson's shoulder. He didn't squeeze, didn't press. Just placed it there. The kind of touch that says, "I'm here." "I know," Bruce said. His voice was low. "I'm behind the same wall. Mine's just made of different material. Stay with me, because there's one more part to what happened in that stairwell that night. And this part shifts everything." But there was another reason Bruce Lee went back into NBC that night. He didn't tell Carson until nearly 4 in the morning, as they lit their second cigarettes. "I need to tell you something," Bruce said. "I got in my car in the parking lot, turned on the radio, and I heard a news report." Carson waited. "An actor, Asian American. I won't say his name, but I knew him. We used to go to the same auditions, we used to hear the same line, 'The audience isn't ready.'" Bruce's voice trembled for the first time that night. The radio said he couldn't take it anymore. He ended it. Carson's face changed from shock to understanding, from understanding to fear. "When I heard that news, my hands were on the steering wheel," Bruce said. "And I thought, that could have been me. Another night, another rejection letter, and that could have been me. I got out of the car right then. I needed to talk to someone. I needed to tell someone, I'm here." Carson's hand reached for the Marlboro pack. He picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. His hands were shaking. "I'm glad you came back," he said, in a whisper. "I'm glad you came back." The cameras had long stopped rolling, but what happened between 2 men in that empty studio that night was more real than any camera could have captured. At 5 in the morning, they left the stairwell and climbed to the roof. The sky over Burbank was turning purple. Neither of them spoke. After 6 hours of talking, words were no longer necessary. Bruce pulled out the Marlboro pack, 2 cigarettes left, the last 2. He held one out to Carson. Carson took it. They smoked their last cigarettes in silence, facing the rising sun over Burbank. Then Bruce turned the pack over, pulled a pen from his pocket, and wrote something on the back. He handed it to Carson. Carson read it. He put the pack in his pocket. At 5:47 a.m., a janitor named Maria Espinoza found them at the rooftop door, shaking hands. It wasn't a normal handshake. Long, silent, both hands. Espinoza described the moment years later. They weren't saying goodbye, it was like they were sealing something. When Bruce Lee left NBC that morning, the sun had already risen over Burbank. He went home. Linda was waiting at the door. She hadn't slept all night. She looked at Bruce's face and didn't ask a single question. Sometimes a person's face tells you everything. 2 weeks later, Bruce flew to Hong Kong, and there, he broke down the doors that Hollywood had closed on him, with his own hands. He made The Big Boss. The film shattered box office records in Hong Kong, then came Fist of Fury. Then Way of the Dragon. The American audience wasn't ready, they had said. Bruce Lee stopped waiting for the audience and built his own stage. Carson, from that season onward, quietly changed something about The Tonight Show, without explanation, without announcement. That season, for the first time, he gave an Asian American guest 5 full segments. His producers were stunned. It was a risky move for ratings. Carson said one thing: the audience is ready. It always was. The impact of that night seeped beyond the studio. NBC's viewer line received over 400 letters that week, most from Asian American viewers who had heard that Bruce Lee appeared on the program and wrote, "Finally, someone sees us." The television editor of the Los Angeles Times wrote in his column that week, "Carson's guest choices this season show that America's living room no longer belongs to a single face." The Asian American Citizens League sent Carson a letter of thanks. Carson placed it under the glass of his desk and left it there until the day he died. And Bruce Lee's rise in Hong Kong wasn't just one actor's career move, it was the first crack in Hollywood's wall of Asians can't be leads. Enter the Dragon. Bruce's Hollywood comeback film, grossed over $100 million worldwide when it hit theaters in 1973. Warner Brothers, yes, the same studio that gave the kung fu role to Carradine, called Bruce Lee this time. This time, they didn't say the audience isn't ready, but Bruce Lee never fully lived to see that victory. July 20th, 1973. Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong at the age of 32, sudden and unexplainable. The world was in shock. Hollywood was in shock. And that night, July 20th, 1973, Johnny Carson did something at the opening of The Tonight Show. The orchestra was ready. Ed McMahon was ready. The audience was applauding. Carson sat behind his desk, but he didn't speak. 8 seconds of silence on live television. The producer whispered through the earpiece, "Johnny, we're on." Carson didn't hear, or pretended not to. On his desk, next to the note cards, sat an unopened pack of Marlboros. 8 seconds later, Carson looked into the camera and said a single sentence: "Some conversations never end." Then he continued with the show. He never explained the Marlboro pack. Nobody asked, but everyone in the studio that night felt that something was different. Years passed. Carson died of emphysema in 2005, when his Malibu home was being cleared out. A Marlboro pack was found in the drawer of his desk. Old, faded, the cellophane long gone. On the back, in blue ink, Bruce Lee's handwriting: "For the man behind the desk, the real one, not the one on TV. You are not invisible." B. Carson hadn't kept this pack for 34 years. He had carried it for 34 years, from desk to desk, house to house, life to life. Sometimes the most important conversations begin after the cameras stop rolling, and sometimes the person who understands you best is the person who looks nothing like you. If this story moved you, subscribe right now. Share it with someone who feels invisible, someone whose face, whose voice, whose story the world keeps overlooking. Drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Have you ever had a conversation that changed your life? A conversation that happened in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with someone you barely knew, but somehow said exactly what you needed to hear. Because somewhere right now, someone is sitting in their own stairwell, and they need someone to walk back through that door.